Hi class, this is my final project of my ideal classroom environment, and I named this presentation Successful Classroom 101 because this is really the um, small things that you're going to need to eventually make your classroom very successful, and you need to have these things to implement in your classroom. So let's start with a quick review of psychology of learning. So we've talked about the various learning theories, behaviorism, physical development, emotional development, sociocultural development, Kohlberg's moral development, and all those different things. We've talked about constructivism. We've talked about classroom management, which is, tools that you use in your classroom to make sure everything runs smoothly. You want to have positive and negative reinforcement, sometimes punishment, but you want to be careful with that. And you also want to have something to reward your students. And another thing that we've talked about is the idea of motivation in school. Motivation is a big deal with students because if they're not motivated to learn, then it will just be a not very active and engaging environment for the kids. So let's start with my classroom. So when I did my classroom architect project, I was thinking very realistically because at the high school level, you will most likely not have your own personal classroom to design. A majority of the teachers in my high school had to share classrooms because there simply was not enough room. So my classroom design was a very traditional one. The students' desks were organized in rows facing the board and the smartboard, with a teacher desk in the back of the room so I can always keep an eye on everything going on. But realistically, I probably won't be at my desk too often, only during my free periods or when I'm giving a test or a quiz and I just need to keep an eye on everything that's going on in my class. I also gave a lot of storage in my room because at the high school level you have textbooks, you have student papers, you have a whole bunch of things that you need to keep in storage. And there's always room for rearrangement if needed in the classroom. The desks are not permanently placed there. You could always rearrange them if needed. You can always, change them for a lesson and make sure they're put back together for the next class. You don't have to keep them there all the time. So here's a quick overview of my classroom. As you can see, the desks are arranged in rows. Here's the projector, here's the whiteboard. There will probably be a smartboard in my classroom, hopefully. Here's some of my storage and shelves. Here's my desk and my computer. And I also put a round table in the corner just, if there's group work, if there is an overflow of students in my classroom, because that happens sometimes at the high school level. There could be a very large class, so you might need a little extra room. So, the rules and regulations of my classroom. I want my students to be able to respect others and their property. I want them to let everyone have their turn when talking. I need my students to come prepared to class. They need to have their notebook, a pen or a pencil, their daily planner, and a calculator because this is going to be a math classroom, so calculators will be necessary. They need to be able to follow school rules. At this point in their school career, they'll know the dress code, they'll know the cell phone policy, they'll know the basic rules that the school implements. I need them to be able to follow those in my classroom. The school rules still are necessary in the classroom, not only in the actual outside of your classroom. And another big thing that I want my kids to do is to stay seated until the bell rings. They need to, not pack up 5 minutes before the bell rings and line up at the door because, high school periods are already only 39 minutes in Newburgh. You need to have 39 minutes of instruction, and having the kids pack up 5 minutes early will take away a lot of active learning time. Do adolescents change? The adolescent period of your life is a huge time of change. You go through puberty, you become egocentric, you challenge authority, and all you want to do is conform to your peers. So, at this age, the students are all maturing at varying rates, and some are early maturers while others are late bloomers. Students at this age are also very self-conscious about how they look, and there is an increase in height, weight, and the appearance of acne. While all these physical changes are happening to young adolescents, they are experiencing social changes as well. Young adolescents crave social acceptance and tend to be vain and show off. They are rebellious of parents and tend to challenge authority figures. In respect to cognitive development, young adolescents tend to be egocentric and love learning about things they find useful, and enjoy using their skills to solve real-life problems. There are also a number of emotional changes occurring in young adolescents. They want to be popular, and they tend to have extreme emotional changes due to fluctuating hormones. They want independence from adult control, but return to caring adults for help and reassurance. So all of these different changes are happening in your classroom. There are times when they're sad, there are times when they can turn angry. It's always changing. You have to be aware of that, and you have to make sure that you have the respect of your students. And that's what I talk about over here. How do I account for all of these changes? So, like I said earlier, they love to use their skills to solve real life problems. That means I need to incorporate real life problems into my lessons. I can't just pass them out this boring worksheet that has um, problems that have nothing to do with their real life. I need to take what I'm teaching them and implement it into their daily lives. I also need to gain the students' respect. If they don't respect me and I don't respect them, they're going to challenge me and it's going to be absolute chaos. This class is never going to get anywhere. And another big thing that you want to do in your classroom is have, culturally aware class. So a way in which I can do this is have a culture of the month. And I was thinking that to keep my classroom culturally aware, I'll incorporate different cultural aspects. I could have a different culture represented each month and take that culture and develop a lesson around it. So maybe for 1 month it would be Italy, and the whole entire month all my lessons would, surround Italy and their life and their culture, and I would use that culture into my lessons. So by the end of the school year, they'll have a pretty good idea of different cultures around them in their own classroom, in their community. They need to be aware of what's going on around them, especially in this day and age with this technology and everyone's always connected. The theories that I would love to implement in my classroom would be the constructivist theory and the use of spiral curriculum and the cognitive approach. These two are directly related. The cognitive approach suggests that most of the important elements in the learning process is knowledge the individual brings to the learning situation. And spiral curriculum is taking what your students know and building on it throughout the year. So both of these theories are interchangeable. You want to make sure you know the knowledge that your students brings to the table, and you want to be able to teach to it, and you also want to be able to build on it. So the prior knowledge your kids bring is the most important thing that you need to know as a teacher in your classroom. And I also put the link to my Bruner presentation on constructivism because it goes a little bit more in depth on this spiral curriculum and the different ways in which you can implement that in your classroom. I also want to develop a positive learning environment. I would do this by having a token economy. At the high school level, they're able to be aware of what they're doing. So I think this type of reinforcement is something that can be used at any age. I will create a system in which I give points to students who come to class prepared, get above a 90 on a test, and or do all of their homework for the week. I will keep track of the points in my gradebook, and when the student reaches 100 points, they will receive either extra credit on the next unit test or homework pass. The choice of reward is up to the student because they are at the age where they are able to make the decision on their own. Learning. This will engage the student in active learning because it can help students reinforce positive academic behavior. Also, I can also use discovery learning projects in my class so my students can construct their own knowledge and be active in the learning process. Discovery learning is when you give the students the information they need to learn in a disorganized way, and they construct their knowledge in a way that it makes sense to them. How to maximize student learning. This is a very important aspect of your classroom. You need to have your students make goals at the beginning of the year. You want them to come up with about 5 to 7 goals that are challenging yet achievable. You want to have them refer back to the goal at the end of the school year. This is a way in which I can teach students how to create positive goals for themselves and can show them how great it feels when they accomplish their goals. This is a great positive learning experience for the students. They are able to see how far they've come throughout the school year, and it makes them feel great because they achieved their challenging goals. So this is basically all the steps that you need to know in order to have a successful classroom. You need to have great rules, you need to have a good classroom setup, you need to know what kind of changes your students' age group is going through. You need to have, a good classroom management technique implemented. You need to know what theories you're going to implement, and you also want to create a positive learning environment and maximize the students' learning throughout the year. So, this is it. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening.